Hello. Welcome back to Technical Writing. Today we're going to be talking about how to sell your hunk of junk software. Imagine actually being paid for the work that you do, right? Unbelievable. Yes, today we're going to talk about selling your software, what that entails, and how you should write for a sales pitch. Uh-oh, I just made it real meta there for a second. Okay. How to sell your software, how to get a good sales pitch going, all that good stuff. Okay. So first off, let me describe a little bit the homework that you're going to have on this topic in a bit. You are going to have to write a pitch for one of the software engineering projects that somebody else just wrote an RFP for. So you're going to write a proposal as if you are trying to get the job as your team. Somebody wanted an election special. We can do a little bit on the election. What kind of writing did they do for the election? Here, we'll do a quick little pivot. I will show you guys, I think, the best piece of writing in terms of the election that you need to see. Let's see. I will read it out loud to you. If I can find it, if I can find the full quote. All right, I believe this is it. So, nah, that's not it. Let me go keep looking. There are a lot of good Jefferson quotes. All right, here we go. Here's the original. It's a crappy website, but the quote still stands. I think this is the full form of the letter. I only like to read the full form of this letter because the quote itself is often taken out of context where it's uninteresting. So this comes from a letter from Jefferson. I think they actually have the original here. Why do I have my monitors stacked vertically? It's easier for streaming. Easier for streaming that way. That way I don't have to look to the sides, look up and down. It's also easier for drawing because the second monitor is my drawing tablet. Alright. I think we're big enough here for it to be readable. Okay. So, from Jefferson, to your request of my opinion of the manner in which a newspaper should be conducted so as to be most useful, I should answer by restraining it to true facts and sound principles only. Yet I fear such a paper would find few subscribers. This was written in 1807, very reminiscent of today, isn't it? It is a melancholy truth that a suppression of the press could not more completely deprive the nation of its benefits than is done by its abandoned prostitution to falsehood. Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. 1807 fake news, right? Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. The real extent of the state of misinformation is known only to those who are in situations to confront facts within their knowledge with the lies of the day. This leads to a phenomenon that you should all be aware of called Gelman amnesia, or Gelman amnesia. I'm not sure how to pronounce Gelman's name properly. I think another Dutch guy. But anyway, as software engineers, you are all able to indulge in Gelman amnesia as a phenomenon. So, Gelman amnesia is when you look in the newspaper or into a media source and you find a piece of news or an article or something on which you are an expert. And invariably, whenever I find anything on the internet or in a newspaper or anything on which I'm an expert, after I read it, I realize pretty much the whole thing is wrong. And that's true of almost everything that I read. The vast majority, especially of opinion pieces, either have the material facts wrong, their opinion is garbage, or anything that they've added to it is completely incorrect. And after you've read that portion, you go, oh, well, this article is trash, because I'm an expert and I know it's trash. Now let me go ahead and read the rest of the newspaper and see what else they say about world events and stuff. Well, that's Gelman amnesia. That's you are asserting that some element of media is trash, and then you continue to read the rest of it thinking that somehow they have a better conception of those other topics. So the first thing I do when I evaluate a news source is I try to find like a cybersecurity or computer science related article and see what they have to say about it. And if it's reasonably accurate, then at least I can have some trust over that news source. But most of the time I find myself disappointed. So something that you should probably practice as well. Now that you've had the luxury of becoming an expert in something, you guys are all relatively expert in computer science. When you evaluate a news source, look for the computer science articles, see if they're any good, and if they're not, then everything else probably isn't any good either, right? All right, so continuing with this. We left off at with the lies of the day. I really look with commiseration over the great body of my fellow citizens who, reading newspapers, live and die in the belief that they have known something of what has been passing in the world in their time, whereas the accounts that they have read in newspapers are just as true a history of any other period of the world as of the present, except that the real names of the day are affixed to their fables. General facts may indeed be collected from them, such as that Europe is now at war, that Bonaparte has been a successful warrior, that he has subjected a great portion of Europe to his will, etc., but no details can be relied on. I will add that the man who never looks in a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he knows nothing is nearer to the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors. He who reads nothing will still learn the great facts, and the details are all false. So that's my advice to you in regards to the election, is just turn off all the media, because it is just as junk today as it was in 1807 when people claim that the media is now terrible or is now fake. That's not true. It was bad in 1807 too, and it always will be. And the crux of Jefferson's argument that the details are generally false are very easy to verify. Pull up now that we have the internet, at least it's easy to verify, pull up an archived version of the front page of any newspaper, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, what have you, and look at the things that they thought were important even 1 year ago, let alone 10 years ago, and you will likely find, number one, that none of that stuff actually mattered in the long run. Most of it you probably don't even remember. Number two, any predictions that they made probably were wrong. Number three, most of the facts that they gave probably were never substantiated. And number four, if you try to look up what happened with that story, how it worked out, you will probably be unlikely to find it because nobody cares anymore. Things tend to make the media once and then never again. And that's not really a story that's particularly interesting, where you only know the middle and then you never know the ending. We just sort of forget that we don't know the ending to those kinds of stories. So whatever happens with the election, I don't give a crap. I'll probably look up and see who won, and then that's all I really need to know, because the rest doesn't matter to me, because it's probably nonsense anyway. So there's your election-related, writing-related fun bit, and maybe we'll do a little opinion piece where I'll see what you think about the Jefferson quote here, if we have time on one of these days. Should you read the news? Should you not read the news? What's your opinion? Do you ever look? Let's do a poll. Let's see if people actually read any news. Do you read any news? Yes, and yes and no. So let's see how you guys stack up. And I don't care, obviously. People who read the news, I obviously don't mind if you do. I just find it to be a total waste of your time. Not to say that you shouldn't read tech news. If you don't read tech news, how are you ever going to know what cool technology is on the horizon? I just don't read political or world events. Someone said, opinion piece, BTS should have never won the Kids' Choice Award. That is basically the majority of news today anyway. Stuff like that. On the occasion that I accidentally do scroll through my Google feed I learn a lot about what all the different celebrities are wearing. Not much else besides that. A lot about what different celebrities are wearing, and a lot about who said something that week. A lot of who said something that week. I find that what somebody said is never relevant more than a month out or so after they've said it. The what somebody said news stories are always the least interesting of all. I guess one more cool writing story that we can include, since it is election day, is that there was a big scandal not in this election year, but really through this whole administration over the wrong use of the word there. Right? There's a that famous quote from Trump. They're going to send their rapists. Is it THEIR or THEY apostrophe RE? And the distinction between those two homonyms is basically what triggers that fight between the two political parties, whether or not it was the RE version or the EI version. Depends on which side of the political aisle you stack up on. So, don't use homonyms when you are saying something that could be treated as derogatory, is the moral of the story there. And if you are writing something like a speech that is to be said out loud, and you walk into a phrase like that where the there can be ambiguous, rewrite it. Ambiguous there's apparently become a huge news cycle. Okay, on to software. Looks like everybody reads the news. Guys, come on. Work on your computer science homework instead. It's much more productive. It'll be better for your future. Selling software, the absolute worst part of the software industry. Now, there are many bad parts of the software industry, right? It's by no means a perfect place to work. There's by no means no problems with it. But the absolute worst part of dealing with software, definitely having to sell it. And I would say that this holds most true in the context of running your own business or something, but this is equally true for companies that have to sell their software too. It's the most awful part, really. It's just having to figure out how to actually make any money off of what you produce is so difficult in this field. So let's talk about why selling it is terrible before we go into how you should sell it. So first of all, software is a really high margin field. It's probably the highest margin industry aside from like niche industries. And in terms of like a sector of the economy, I think software is far and ahead the highest margin. When you talk about just gross margin, so revenue minus cost of goods and services, COGS usually abbreviated. So we're talking about the amount of money you made minus the amount of money you spent divided by the amount of money you made. So just your total inbound minus your outbound and then divided by your total inbound. If you're looking at an industry like retail or sales or something, they are only making razor thin margins of like 5%. And this is true for like food industry too, fast food and stuff. That's why all those industries are struggling so much on the pandemic. When your margins are 5%, if you're closed 1 week a year, that's your entire yearly profit, right? If there are 52 weeks in a year, you closed one of them, you're closed about 5% of the year or so. I mean, that's it, you're done. Like 2 weeks, 3 weeks is already approaching 5% of the year in terms of like the days where you make your money. So that's it, right? You've lost all your yearly profit at that point. So that's true of any industry basically that sells stuff direct to consumer. Their margins generally don't exceed 5%. You have companies like Costco whose whole business model is to make no margin and sell exclusively subscriptions. You have companies like any kind of big box store. Their whole business model is just to sell in volume basically. So they're only making, like in industries like Walmart, are only making a few percent on everything they sell, and they're hoping to make it up in volume. If you're in manufacturing, if you're producing real goods, physical goods, you can expect to see margins typically you can expect to see margins somewhere between like 10 and 50%. Like automobiles are typically pretty high margin, expensive goods. You look at like washing machines and dryers and refrigerators, those manufacturers tend to make a fair margin. You start looking into more specific niche goods, their margins tend to be higher because they sell on a lower volume. But generally, manufacturing margins are pretty reasonable, better than retail, but they're still living on a razor's edge. If the economy shifts and people stop buying washing machines, they could really go under pretty quick. Now, software's margins are insane. I don't even know how I picked 75%. I think I picked that by looking up the current average gross margin of the companies classified as software on the Fortune 500 or something like that. But there are companies in software that have four-digit margins. They have practically no operating costs, and they're selling things at a massive profit. Software margins are all over the place. There are consulting firms, on the other hand, that are making closer to the 10% range, but that's rare. Typically, after you factor in your cost of doing business, you're still raking it in software. People are generally making huge margins. If you're making money in software, you're making a lot of money in software. That's a lot of the reason why many of the companies on the Fortune 500, or many of the biggest companies in the United States and across the world right now, are software companies, tech companies. If you look at a company like Microsoft, Apple, or Google, those are three of the largest companies in the United States and in the world. They have a larger profit. They have a larger revenue. Some of them even have a larger profit than many nation states. Even large nation states like in Europe, those companies produce more value than the entire domestic product of several small countries. And all they do, except for obviously Apple, which makes hardware, and Microsoft, which makes some hardware too, and Google is kind of into hardware now, but primarily they make all of their money in software. So Apple is generating almost all of its revenue from things like the App Store and the software that they provide, and technically the hardware that they sell you, they don't really make much on the hardware. They're making it on the software that they sell you. The hardware they sell you is junk that's been marked up highly because the hardware is good. The software is good. The hardware is just, you can buy that hardware much cheaper on Newegg or Micro Center. It's the software in Macs that make them expensive. All right, so what does high margin have to do with sales being terrible? Well, when you have high margins, and when you deal in a high margin industry, what tends to happen is that all of these sales become Pareto distributed because everything is really expensive. And so what ends up happening is that only the big companies, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, and then consulting firms, SAP, Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, those guys get all the contracts, and everybody else gets none of the contracts. Well, basically, those guys get the vast majority of the contracts, and everybody else is kind of either fighting over the small business scraps or trying to claw their way up into the mainstream and compete with these larger firms. But generally, you have this tiered system where it's just the big companies getting all the big contracts. And I encourage you, we looked last week on that RFP for the state of Ohio. Look through what kind of companies win the contract bids. It's all the same companies, all the same big names, the biggest firms in Ohio. And those are the biggest firms regionally. A lot of those contracts are just not big enough for the big firms to compete. But then go look on the national level and see who gets all the awards for the big national level contract. Who gets to design the National Treasury Services website? Who designs healthcare.gov? All that stuff. It's always going to be someone like Accenture, Deloitte, or McKinsey, because those are the only people that can bid in that range. They're the only people that have clout. And a lot of the reason that this happens comes from an expression that you'll hear occasionally in the field, and that's nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So if you're a manager and you have to decide who you're going to go with, and it's IBM, who has been in business for something like 100 years and has decades of experience and has completed thousands and thousands of projects, or let's say a significantly cheaper other guy whose name nobody knows, it's going to be IBM probably, because if you pick IBM and it ends up not working out, no one's going to blame you for making the wrong choice. You pick the company that's been in business for 100 years and has years of expertise behind them. So no one ever gets fired for choosing IBM over the scrappy competitor. But the opposite, definitely true. If you pick the scrappy competitor and it doesn't work out, it's probably going to be your head that rolls. They're not going to blame the competitor for that issue. And so generally speaking, when it's between the slightly more expensive big guy and even the significantly more expensive no-name, big guy's going to win it. In pricing, software behaves very strangely. It often behaves like a luxury, like a Veblen good. We'll look at a chart about Veblen goods on the next slide, but let me talk about what Veblen goods are first, because you've probably heard of quite a few. talk about, for example, the best known failed Veblen good is Calvin Klein, because it was once a very expensive designer brand, and it's now, you can buy Calvin Klein shirts for $10, so it's sort of lost its luxury status. But other luxury goods still have their status. Nobody buys a Gucci purse for $20. In fact, the more the Gucci purse costs, the more people value it. And this is true of many luxury goods. The more expensive they are, regardless of their quality, the more people are willing to pay for them. So these are goods that defy the typical supply and demand relationship and become higher in demand the more they cost, because they become a status symbol. So these are often goods that are not superior to their competitors in any way. A Gucci bag is in no way better than any other bag. I mean, maybe it's a slightly higher build quality, but you can buy a bag of equal build quality for a tenth of the price. It has nothing to do with its build quality. It also doesn't really have anything to do with its appearance, because you could buy a bag that is identical in appearance except for the name tag on it. People purchase Veblen goods solely as symbols of status and solely because they are expensive. A lot of software ends up being sold like this too. People buy the software that is the most expensive because the impression is that the most expensive one is the best one. And undercutting on margin rarely works because of this phenomenon. Another way to phrase it is that if you were shopping for different automobiles, if you wanted a luxury automobile and you wanted the best luxury automobile, you wouldn't go buy a BMW because it was cheaper than a Mercedes. You are not competing on cost when you're buying luxury goods. And in fact, if the BMW was better than the Mercedes, but you were trying to buy the best luxury automobile, if it was cheaper, that would probably make you suspicious. Right? It seems like naturally that if you want to buy the very best and you're not cost sensitive, the most expensive one is likely the best option. And so software often behaves in this way, where it actually races to the top in price instead of racing to the bottom in an effort to appeal to the kinds of businesses that want to purchase the very best stuff. So let's look at from a tech consulting person, a venture capital consulting person, an outline of how software as a service sales often look in terms of their demand curve. So you have your typical supply and demand curve, whereas the supply of a good goes up, they are able to charge less for it. The demand, as demand goes up, they are able to sell more of it. You know, the usual supply and demand relationship. You don't need that explained to you. Now you got your weird software as a service Veblen goods curve, where in the middle of the price there is nobody. And this is really true of software if you think about it, and I want you to think about some example products. Let's look at game engines, for example. There are two tiers of game engine. There's free, basically Unity and others like it that are some open source alternatives, right? And then there's like the $10,000 range. There's nothing in between. There's no $500 game engine. There's no $1,000 game engine. There are no buyers at that level. There is free, and there's $10,000, and that's it. It goes similarly with cloud services, right? There's the free. You've not used enough for us to charge you. We just want to get you in and get you hooked. So you've got this credit. We'll credit you up to, 1,000 gigs or something. And then there's $20,000 a month. There's very little in between. There are a lot of different software products like this. See if you can think of some in chat. The software products where there's the cheap one and the really expensive one, no in between. So it's either the low tier or the high tier, and there's no in between tier. And sometimes that's the way it is. You've got your low price, there's a high demand at the low price, and you can make it up in volume. Or there's this, again, perception, this Veblen goods perception that the most expensive is the best. And so this really expensive one, the demand suddenly starts picking up again. Why do people buy these expensive products? There's products like CAD. There's OpenCAD. Someone mentioned Microsoft Access. Sure, it's hard to find any kind of like Access type software, this database type software that doesn't fall between the level of free and very expensive. It's pretty true of everything that does that feature. It's either free, host it yourself, or here's a really expensive usage price rate. It's probably like I don't know, like $1 a table entry or something. Depends. They really make all their money selling to startups that begin on the free tier and end up moving to the paid one. That's the business model there. But you get into the situation where you are competing for the highest price slash best quality, and cost kind of flies out the window as a consideration. A confounding issue is that nobody really knows what they want. Pretty much anytime you build a new piece of software, or anytime you decide to start a software company, or anytime you decide to begin consulting, you always end up in this place where you become a solution in search of a problem. Even if maybe you have existing customers already, then your expansion proposition still ends up usually as a solution in search of a problem. Which makes sense and is very true of other industries as well. It was pretty much always like this with manufacturing too. It's you don't know that you need a machine to build paper clips if you're building paper clips by hand. You can build them by hand. You can just take wire and pay people to form it into a paper clip. You don't know that there's a machine that can make your life better and do that faster. And if there's a hand tool that makes your workers 50% more efficient, okay, you'd probably buy that. But if there's a multi-million-dollar machine that eliminates your entire workforce and allows you to build 1,000,000 paper clips a day automatically, I mean, that totally changes the way that your business operates, and you might not even be able to conceptualize that kind of change. Many businesses don't realize what they could save with software products. They don't realize what they could possibly do, how many people they could potentially move or get rid of their salaries by automating away their jobs. Customers often don't realize their desire. There's the famous Steve Jobs quote of giving people what they want, usually yielding nothing interesting. And of course, if you had come to people during the flip phone era and offered them a touchscreen phone that can play music and browse the internet, they probably would have said, meh. And yet, that's all we have now. There are no more flip phones. So sometimes people would just say in the flip phone era, oh, well, I'd like to be able to have a larger keyboard. I'd like a larger battery. I'd like a nicer screen. None of those were actually what people wanted. They didn't get any of those things. They got touchscreen smartphones instead. And lo and behold, that turns out to be what they wanted all along. Sometimes you're tricking people into getting what they want. Tricking people into thinking that they want something when they actually don't. So there's basically three approaches, and the two rarest are the first and the last ones. There's, if you build it, they will come. You try to make a great product, and you hope that the customers will come later. It doesn't mean that you're completely agnostic to who your customers are going to be or anything, but you don't have any sales or specific people in mind. You just have an industry in mind when you build it. And there are some great examples of this. I just mentioned the iPhone. All kinds of others as well. Most open source software or popular apps end up like this. You also get your one-hit wonder success stories in this way. Things like Flappy Bird, where you just come out of nowhere and you're making a bunch of money. You build something and people just show up and it's totally unexpected. That happens, but that's definitely not the majority of software. Most software is just iterating on what is already a suboptimal solution. Most software is just a replacement of a replacement of a replacement of a replacement. YouTube is a replacement for basically previous iterations of YouTube, which was itself a replacement for crappier video streaming sites, which was a replacement for sending videos to each other as attachments, which was a replacement for VHS tapes, which is a replacement for just walking up to people and talking to them. It's all kind of replacements on top of that. We're on Discord right now. Discord is a replacement for Mumble, which overthrew Vent, which overthrew TeamSpeak, which overthrew... I don't even remember what came before that. There were other things in the mix there, like Skype and whatever Adobe made and all that other stuff. I mean, you got all kinds of iterations there. You've got your Microsoft suite being overthrown by Google, so Google Docs overthrowing Microsoft, which also competed with Libre. On Mac, there was a different document editor. I don't remember what it's called. On Linux, you still have Libre, which itself overthrew OpenOffice. Iteration on iteration there. Enterprise software is the same way. Generally speaking, it's a solution replacing an older solution, replacing an older solution, and then you also have this whole industry of software rewrites, of organizations coming and saying, look, our software works, but it's old and we want a shiny new one. And they want to rewrite their whole back end. And because this industry is absolutely insane with how often our technology changes, that usually means a from-scratch regeneration of a product that already existed. So if a customer wants to move their website that they built in Dreamweaver in 2002 onto the modern tech stack, nothing's going to be recycled. It's a from-scratch rebuild of their entire product using new technology. You've achieved nothing except rebuilding a product that already exists. That's where most software falls into this category of small iteration. And then there's the third category of software, which is selling crutches to people who can already walk just fine. Nothing wrong with this, it's just it's an interesting industry, but trying to convince businesses and customers that they can do just a little bit better if they have this extra thing. Some of the examples that I'm willing to give you are like these endless software suggestions for keeping yourself organized. So like different organization software, like on your phone, it costs like $1 or $2, and they help you make lists and bulleted lists and reminders and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, you could just write that down on a piece of paper or just memorize things better. There's really no evidence that any of it works, but people buy them. Almost everybody has one on their phone, some kind of software. Usually they paid $1 for it or something at some point that they use for organizing themselves. All kinds of examples like this of tools that solve no problem and essentially don't do very much at all. I think social media probably falls into this category. It's a crutch for people who otherwise could have communicated with one another just fine, but now have decided to use an inferior form of communication instead. This brings us to getting customers. All right, so getting customers in software is absolutely terrible. If I asked you guys to, in 270 or in this class, take the software you've written and go see if you can sell it to anybody, you would be shocked. I mean, it's impossible, practically. Just the idea of how would I sell this to somebody is daunting. Let's say you have the best piece of software in the world. Still, like, what do you do with it at that point? Let's say if I handed you, it's free to rights to your possession, the best piece of software in the world that makes everybody's life so much better, how would you distribute it to people? It's a very complicated prospect. It's much harder than manufactured goods and durable goods because you're selling people something virtual. You're selling them an idea. So first you need to demonstrate it, and then you need to somehow convince them that they need it. And that is really, really difficult. So first, the main suggestion people make you when you're starting out is that you got to start cold calling and cold emailing people. And we all know that this barely works. We all hate spam. We all hate answering the phone. We all hate answering unsolicited emails. In some jurisdictions, this isn't even legal to do. Like some places ban door-to-door sales. Some places ban calling people on the do not call list. If you're an LLC and you start calling people on the do not call list, I mean, technically you're breaking the law. So there's all kinds of different problems there. And of course, it's often annoying, so it's a good way to get yourself blackballed. But if we've got time here, we'll look through my inbox and look at all the cold emails I get. I get at least 2 or 3 a day from people trying to sell me software, so I find that amusing. Because I'm an educator, right? And there's so much education software out there, especially since COVID, the number of cold emails to sell me some piece of garbage grading platform, learning platform, some alternative to Zoom, whatever, all these different things. The pressure has become real. Okay, you could advertise. You could buy internet ads. You could send people flyers in the mail, whatever people do to advertise. But yeah, right, where you can get the money for that. This only happens if you have venture capital money to begin with, or if you've got some investment, some private investment, a small loan of $1 million or something like that. You're probably not going to have advertising available to you in most cases. And even if you do have $1 million, you're going to spend it on advertising when you still have a product to build and maintain? It's a very hard thing to do. But it turns out that when you do secure venture capital funds for a startup, a big part of your budget typically will go to that marketing portion. So marketing is always one of the first things that you seek investment for. If you have a great product, sometimes it can feel really difficult to have to share with others just to get advertising. I agree. That sucks. Like, you've built the whole product, you've maintained the whole product, it's all yours, and now you have to forfeit a portion of your profit when you've done all the work just for somebody to market and advertise it. Yep, because marketing and advertising is the hardest part, and you probably can't do it, so you're probably going to have to hire somebody else. You can try to spread by word of mouth like good old Flappy Bird, but that is 1 in a million. For every Flappy Bird, there are 1,000 apps that do exactly the same thing that languish in obscurity. So word of mouth is probably not going to happen, although viral marketing is definitely a thing now. SEO is search engine optimization. At one point, you could fake word of mouth by hiring a skilled search engine optimizer to boost you in the page rankings on Google. Now there are so many search engine optimizers fighting with one another that it is going to be expensive and difficult for you to beat out all the others and get your way to the top. And of course, Google and other search engines are always constantly fighting the SEOs to make sure that they can't optimize their nonsense products to the top of the web. Nonetheless, you still do see a lot of things come up like this. All right. Another problem that you run into when you're trying to find customers is that the user is not always the person who is paying for the product. In fact, it's rarely the case that the user is the person who is paying for the product. So all of the products that are being advertised to me, all of these different education softwares and such, I would be the user of those, but then so would you guys. And in most cases, neither of us would be paying. It'd be the university that's paying. Now, in some cases, I know some of you use like Codio for your other classes. That was one of those things that probably got into our into our field of things that we know about through advertising. I don't know how we originally heard of it, but I don't know if it was like a search or I'm assuming it was probably an ad first, and you guys pay for it. So in that case, you're the user and the buyer. But we were actually the decision maker, despite you being the buyer. So that's an even more complicated relationship. You're trying to convince people who are not the buyer to make other people pay for something. That is a very unusual relationship, and it's not something you see very often in other industries. Obviously, you see that kind of relationship in like the textbook industry, but you don't see it too often in manufacturing. It's also one of the darkest parts of software is that sometimes your users are like your cattle rather than your actual customers. So sometimes the users are your source of revenue, not because they pay for your product, but because you sort of parasitically leech their information off them and sell it to others. In fact, a lot of internet-based services operate this way. There is advertising, which I find to be the bane of all software, and that's why I always have all of my ads blocked. It always shocks me when I see software developers that don't have all their ads blocked. It's very bizarre to me, considering you know how easy it is to do. Why would you continue to watch ads? I don't think I've voluntarily watched an ad probably in over a decade. I haven't seen an ad on anything in over a decade. If I see ads on anything, I just leave and use a different service because I don't want to watch ads. There's your corporate productivity software, which is sold to the company, but then is used by employees, so they're not the ultimate buyers of the software. And then you have the usual harvesting and selling of data, selling people's location data and personal information to third parties so that they can use it to better construct their advertisements and such. Some people are okay with this. I don't think it's that big of a deal selling people's public information most of the time. It is a little bit creepy in the extreme, but that is the price that you pay for using most of the software that you use. So this is the business model for your web browser. This is the business model for most of the sites that you visit on the internet. This is the business model for a number of platforms probably that you're on. And you're aware of this, and you're probably consenting to that relationship, so that's fine. But it is still an odd relationship, an odd way to make money. In this case, you're not really selling your product for money. You're selling the idea of somebody using it for free, and you are trying to kind of either obscure or make them okay with the fact that you are harvesting and selling your data as you do it. And usually they go with the obscuring side, right? It's not like when you sign up for your web browser, when you sign up for Twitter, when you sign up for Facebook, they say, your account is free. However, we're going to spy on you, take all of your location and personal data, and sell it to third-party advertisers. If they said that, you probably wouldn't use them, or at least some people would probably go, you know what, never mind. But instead, they just say, you agree to the terms of service. Please read this 95-page treatise if you want to know more. All right, so here are some tips if you are going to sort of try to make it on your own in software. And I don't mean like a one-man show. Maybe you want to start a business with your friends. Maybe you just want to sell a few pieces of software as a freelancer. But let's say you want to sell something, some software, you want to sell it for money. It might be a game, it might be an app, it might be a desktop application, it might be a website, whatever. Okay, so first, you should determine the market that you're going to try to target before you actually write the software. That means don't try to be a solution in search of a problem after you've already completely written the software. As it turns out, what you've written is probably going to be useless for most people. Now, if you write a productivity application for yourself of some kind, and then you find out that actually this is really useful, somebody might be willing to pay money for it, that's fine. But if your goal is to make money, if your goal is to do this professionally, then try to determine the market before you write it. And this is the hardest thing, I think, for developers to bear in mind. I think it's the hardest thing for almost any craftsman to bear in mind, but it's particularly hard to bear in software. It's that software is not valued by the effort that it took you to make it. This is largely true of everything, but in software, it's just really hard not to see beautiful, elegant, well-written software that took thousands and thousands of hours of work and say, oh, that must be worth money. And then look at Flappy Bird and go, you're not worth any money, Flappy Bird. You're just a bird that flies up when I tap the screen. Well, no. The software's value is determined by the value it provides to the consumer. If you're beautifully written, thousands of lines of code, extremely complicated, and extremely well done game is not as interesting to the consumer as Flappy Bird, then it is not as valuable by definition. And that's all it is. The value is the value that it has to the consumer, nothing more, nothing less. The amount of effort that you put in to writing your software has absolutely nothing to do with its ultimate value. And this is true to an extent for your design project as well. While I've chosen projects that I think you'll all be able to complete within the course of the semester, the final value of those projects to the consumer and the final value in terms of how I consider them for your finished grade has really nothing to do with the amount of effort you put in. It has everything to do with what the finished product looks like and how useful it is to the consumer. That is really the only thing that matters ultimately. Value is to an extent probabilistic too. Before you've purchased a product, when you don't yet know what you're going to have, you have this value proposition where you might get something, you might save X or generate X, but with software there's always that chance of failure. So if I'm ordering a new website, there is a chance that I'm going to get a fancy new website and it's going to provide me so much new business, or it's going to reduce me so much in costs versus dealing with the old website, or it's a total flop and I get nothing. It ends up worse than the one that I had before. That's always a possibility. Or I end up having to throw more money into it, etc. Your customers, and you would say yourself, you're always making those kinds of considerations. You're always thinking, well, my value, the value that I get out of this, it could be zero. I could get nothing. It's not as significant in things like manufactured goods. When you go and buy a new car, you're going to get something out of it. Even if it's a complete lemon and it fails after a week, you can fix it. You're going to be left with an asset when you buy a physical good. With software, you can end up with nothing. It can be totally useless to you. So learn to give people hard numbers. Learn to tell them exactly what things are going to cost. Be transparent. Don't be wishy-washy about your cost. That's always very annoying to me. Some people tolerate the wishy-washiness about cost to me, but I think that it's a very bad idea in general. If you want to get into a form of consulting, so in this definition of consulting, I mean that people are taking bids like we looked at last week, and you are making bids for those contracts. So you are basically writing software that's been asked for on a contract. You're not making the people come to you. You're not seeking out the customers. You're seeking out customers and offering them your services. If that's what you want to do, I'd say my number one tip, and I've said this before, is to value your time and scale appropriately. If you undercut yourself, no one will respect you, and you won't find any work. So respect yourself and pay yourself in proportion to what you're actually worth. I'd say $50 an hour minimum, $100 an hour. Pretty standard even for someone who's just getting started. But you better actually be willing to finish the jobs that you start, because you'll lose respect very quickly if you don't. You probably won't be paid either. And be ready to hustle, because in addition to the hourly work that you do for pay, there are going to be tens and tens of hours spent cold calling, cold emailing, seeking out customers, doing all of that sales stuff. Unless you have the money to pay somebody else, expect to spend a very large part of your week on the sales, marketing, and other overhead of your business. So if you can't cut 60 to 80-hour weeks out of your life, don't even try getting into this kind of field. As you become more experienced in the industry and you make connections, you might be able to establish relationships with people that let you do this job in a 40-hour week. And I hear that a lot from people who are in like their 30s and 40s and have been freelance for a long time. Now they're finally living normal lives. But when they got started, they were in crazy town working 80-hour weeks. So this is probably pretty typical. You got to expect that early on. If you want to become a skilled consultant, so you want to help other people write software, you want to be an expert in software, essentially a contract expert in software, then you're never going to do that starting from scratch. You pretty much need to join a consulting firm, Deloitte, McKinsey, whatever, get promoted there a few times, and then strike it out on your own in 10 or 20 years. That's your best bet for getting into a field like that. All the cybersecurity firms and other different consulting firms that go to businesses and show them what they can do right or wrong, those guys have a lot of experience behind them that they show off when they come to the table with those deals. You can't just start doing it without any experience. All right, that brings us to writing and sales. Now that we have a little bit of background on how hard sales are in software, let's talk a little bit about how you could write to your customer. Now, one of the things that's interesting about software is that almost all of your sales are going to come in writing. You don't see a lot of television commercials for software. You might see an ad for Clash of Clans or something. You might see people take out YouTube spots for Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends. They are not my sponsor. I wish, though. And you see those kinds of ads occasionally for software, but the vast majority of software is sold by being discovered somewhere on the web or in some other written format. Most people don't get to hear about your software, and even when they do hear about it, it's usually some kind of script. So I think these rules apply to sales in general. Some people would disagree with don't be pushy. Some people do the ABCs instead, always be closing. I find those people completely intolerable and never buy anything from them myself. So up to you. If you're the kind of person who values the ABCs, then maybe you're probably better suited for that type of sales. But I think in software, most people tend to be a little bit more passive and don't fall for that especially much. I could be wrong. Certainly, you're willing to give it a go. But I think not being pushy is probably the better option in software. Obviously, don't be annoying. That means a lot of different things, but don't be spammy, don't be repetitive, don't take up too much of their time, don't use annoying subject headers for your emails, don't use an auto dialer, don't say annoying things when they pick up the phone, don't spam them with chat, don't put up a giant pop-up in the middle of your screen when they access your website that asks you to subscribe. We all know that these things are done all the time. Those tactics suck. It doesn't really work on anybody. I don't know why they still happen. I guess they work on some people if people are still doing them, but all of these tactics are very irritating, and it's better if you don't do them. All right. You want to foster understanding with your target. So you want to build up a rapport. You want them to know that you know their problem and how to solve it, that you understand their situation. You want to build empathy with the client. That does not mean you need to be friends with them. It doesn't mean that you need to bro out with them or, just write about fun stuff for 2 lines, trying to hook them in. You want to be professional and get them in with your product. You have to know your audience. You have to give technical information to technical audiences and don't give it to non-technical audiences. If you're emailing somebody who is a purchasing manager at a company, don't tell them anything about script, language, any kind of performance metrics, operating system, anything like that. Purchasing managers probably don't know that stuff. But if you're talking to their CTO, their chief technical officer, then yeah, you should be telling them how you're going to improve their metrics, what systems you run on, all this different stuff. That means that before you send out your adverts, you need to know who your audience is. And luckily, in the age of internet advertising, you can do this even for ads, right? So because of all this wonderful data collection and stuff, you can figure out what kind of person is seeing your ad roughly, because Google, through their AdSense program, basically builds up a profile of who you are. And so, like for me, when I see ads on the internet, which is almost never, but again, when I do see ads on the internet, it's for stuff that is technical and generally speaking for like tech products, and they will give some details. Okay, so you have to know who you're speaking to. You have to know at least roughly who your audience is before you start sending out your sales messages. I would say you should always talk to people in plain English first. You don't know everybody's English level. You don't even know if your customers are necessarily domestic. Most people prefer to be spoken to in plain English. Most people, when they see something in formal writing, they kind of disregard it. It doesn't do well to see a formal intro. It makes it seem like it's kind of canned. It's not as personal. So I'd say hook people in with plain English. But then when you're talking to them, when you actually engage in a conversation, then you should probably try to be as formal as possible, because people appreciate when you're very specific, which formal language is, and also when you're very deferent, which formal language is. All right. Don't present yourself as somebody who is trying to sell them something. Present yourself as a consultant. Present yourself as somebody who is helping them to solve a problem. The best case when you're showing the customer the problem that you can solve is that you show them a problem they didn't know that they had. So if you show your customer a problem they didn't know that they had, then you can be the solution that matches their problem. Remember, most software is a solution in search of a problem. You want to be transparent about your pricing, but you don't want to start talking a lot of numbers. You don't want to start highlighting the price right away. You don't want to be pushy with it. You don't want to be like Billy Mays. You don't want to say only 3 easy payments of $19.99 over and over again. That works for as seen on TV. The reason it's funny is because it doesn't work very well for most sales tactics. You see this a lot in like used car sales too, industries like that. Most people find it grating and annoying. Now you do have to be transparent about your pricing. That means making it easily accessible, making it very clear how you're going to bill, what the different tiers are of your service. Most services, especially software services, have different tiers, right? Maybe a free tier, maybe a mid-tier, maybe a premium, maybe they have an enterprise, maybe something else. So let people know up front you would be an enterprise, okay? Then they can see what they're going to pay. You might tell them, but don't be repetitive about it. Why is transparency essential? So that people know what they can afford. Because like, okay, when they send me these different learning platforms and stuff, they often don't tell me what the price is going to be. Now, if they send me learning.co and they're like, we can automatically grade all your students and do everything and it'll be wonderful, and then I go to their website and they don't have pricing, I'm not going to request a quote. I don't care. I'm not sure if it's going to be affordable, so I'm just going to pass. In the unlikely event that we do request a quote, which has happened a couple times, usually the price is actually so reasonable that we would have accepted it. But you know, it's very odd that they don't show their price. It's very annoying when I don't see price transparency, because if I'm not sure that I can afford something, even organizationally, if I'm not sure we can afford something, I'm probably going to pass. If I have to get a quote, I'm probably going to pass. This allows them to differentiate their price to different kinds of customers, so they charge certain people more and certain people less, but the advantage, I think, is really outweighed by the fact that a lot of people are just going to leave when they can't see the price. And try to tie your pitch back to their business. So again, what are you doing to improve their business? How are you solving their problems. Try to personalize your pitch to what they do and the problems that they have. Research a little bit and see what they do and what sorts of problems that industry might have. Consulting, unlike sales, is always a personal relationship. Consultants help people solve their problems. They work through their problems with them. There is no canned response that a consultant can give. You can't be hired on to consult, be asked, okay, so what can we do to improve our process here? If you just give them the same canned response, or if you give them a response that sounds canned, then you're probably a crappy consultant, because you're not really giving them any kind of personalized information they couldn't have just probably read on the general internet. There's no pitch for consulting. There is a specific conversation that you have with your customer for what you think that you can improve for them. The only people who live on sales pitches are venture capitalist types who are always and always prating on about the elevator speech and those different things. They want you to be able to sell things quickly and to give canned answers and to perform sales pitches. Most of us hate to hear elevator speeches and canned sales pitches and all of that stuff. It doesn't really help us. You should have those prepared, because there are many of those kinds of people in the world, and they have a lot of influence, and they typically make purchasing decisions. So you need to have a pitch ready, but you shouldn't rely on your pitch when dealing with every customer. You should try to be personal with them. You want to be comparative. You want to be explicit in saying, why me? This is why me. So you want to specifically say why you are better than the alternatives. And remember that one of the alternatives to buying your product is always to do nothing. Okay, so if you have a product that makes the customer's life better, show them how having your product and paying for it and doing whatever it takes to get it is better than doing nothing, because doing nothing is the most compelling alternative. People have inertia. They prefer to keep doing what they're going to do. You need to overcome the inertia of doing nothing. Obviously not true if the company is soliciting for bids. So if they have an RFP or something, in that case, you should not be comparing to the do nothing option, because they have already conceded that doing nothing is not an option. They are soliciting for this project. They know they need to do it. So in that case, you're comparing yourself against who else might be in that bid market, why you are the more compelling option. You want to tell people what you're doing to make their life better, what you're doing to make their business better, etc. And what's going to improve when they buy your product. What metrics are going to go up? How is life going to be easier? Try to help your customer imagine what's going to be the future with your product. Some of the common pitfalls that many people make. First, live demos are very boring. People who live demo their product always put me to sleep, put everybody to sleep. If you're going to have a live demo, it needs to be Steve Jobsian, where it's very curated, well prepared, neat. It's not just, hey, I'm going to open up the software and use it like a normal person. You need to have like a choreographed performance of your software, because most live demos are a snooze fest, especially if you're trying to sell something like accounting software. No one wants to see that. And they might, but that's probably not what you want to lead with. Technical comparisons using numbers are very boring, especially if you're talking about like instructions per clock, or how fast my program is, how much memory it uses up. Those kinds of metrics are not really interesting to anybody except maybe server administrators who care how much memory an application uses that's cloned to 10,000 units or something. But the vast majority of people do not care about any of that stuff, including software people. I would never purchase or use one software over another because of its memory consumption. I use like my choice of IDE, for example. Am I going to use Notepad over Eclipse because it has 1,000th of the memory footprint? Probably not. You want to highlight the metrics that are important to your users, but don't just bombard them with figures. In fact, it's better if you only have a couple of metrics that you focus on the most and you don't provide any others. And you'll see this strategy. Let's bring it back to the election. This is the strategy that almost all politicians use. Politicians will memorize somewhere between 2 and 5 numbers a week, and they will probably a month, and they'll just repeat those numbers over and over again everywhere where they speak, right? Because this is a common tactic for getting people on your side. You just keep repeating the same number, even if it's a figure that's not even accurate. I won't give any examples, but look at any politician, zoom back 5 years, find a speech of theirs where they give a number, and look up the number, see if it's accurate. It's probably not, but it's just a number that they pick because it helps people to know that there's a numerical advantage or something to refer back to that is quantitative. You can do the same thing for your product. We're 67% faster. 67% faster. I don't know what that means. 67% faster, but it sounds good. I wouldn't do anything that vague because people can see through that kind of nonsense. But if you do have good quantitative figures, then push those forward. Don't focus on them too much. A lot of people waste time talking to people who don't make the purchasing decisions. And it's kind of rude and kind of probably it sounds not nice to just dismiss people once you've realized that they are unable to purchase your product. Don't focus on them too much. And this is true of students and any other market that probably doesn't have the money. Some companies will specifically target students for their products with free versions so that they can hook them in later to the paid one when they go into enterprise. That's a great move. But you don't see a lot of companies focusing on marketing to the people who don't have the money to make purchases. This is also why you don't see a lot of enterprise software like AutoCAD or something having an individual version or being sold to individuals. Those aren't the people that buy it anyway. They're Windows shoppers at best. The best that you can hope for if you are a company like Unity or AutoCAD or MathCAD, the best you can hope for is that the individual pirates your software, and then when they get a job, they say, this is what I'm used to, and then they buy a legitimate copy. That's why all of those different softwares, the CADs and the production softwares of the world, are notoriously easy to pirate. The newest version is always available pretty much the day it comes out for paying customers, because no enterprise in their right mind will use the pirated version. The legal crackdown would be tremendous. And at the same time, those companies actually want people to use their personal version so that they can build up a customer base. So part of their business strategy is the simplicity of piracy. This is also the reason that Windows doesn't even try to take your money. You can use your pirated copy of Windows forever. You don't even have to pirate it. You can download Windows from their website and use it without ever activating it. You'll just have a watermark in the corner. It's the only thing that really changes. You have a watermark and an annoying pop-up, and that's it. So Windows essentially has a free version on the condition of being annoying just because they want the entire market to use Windows. And then the other thing, the last pitfall, is that just like many other things, bad customers are also Pareto distributed. 10-20% of your customers cause 80-90% of your headaches. Don't be afraid to drop people who are annoying, who are too annoying. The people who cause the most headaches are often not profitable for you, so you can let them go. All right, any questions on sales before we go to checking out my emails? All right, just to demonstrate to you guys, I didn't look at any of these. They are all unread. Okay, because I don't read crappy cold spam emails just like everybody else doesn't read crappy cold spam emails. So I guess I'll try to zoom in here. Now, over the weeks, anytime I get one of these, I build a new automated filter, and the rest of them go to this junk folder here. So I got all manner of junk in my junk folder. Why don't you guys just pick one, and I'll look at it. In the meantime, I'll just pick at random. So I'm gonna give me your choice in either chat. I'm gonna pick at random. Let's look at Blackboard. Blackboard's a major education vendor. What does Blackboard want to sell me? Learn from global experts in digital teaching practices. Enroll and save 20%. At Blackboard, we've assembled a team of top professionals in education. So why are they better than their alternatives? Because they have top professionals. And where did they highlight the price? Right at the top, except they did it in the shadiest and least good way possible, which is by telling me the percentage that I can save without actually telling me the final cost of the product. So boo on you, Blackboard. I will never give you any money because you did not tell me how much it costs up front. Well, now, anyway, it's too late. I had to enroll by August 31st. Okay. And then they give me a list of why I should choose Blackboard, because some of the credentials held by their facilitators, they have a master's of education. Some of them even have a master's of science in instructional design and technology. Very helpful. Thank you for telling me why your people are well qualified. So although this annoys me, and although I would certainly not buy it, the structure is well done. They've quickly presented their case, how they can benefit me. They have tried to establish empathy with me as an educator, and then they have shown me their value proposition by demonstrating their qualifications, and then they have attempted to hook me in by the usual cheap trick of convincing me that I can save some amount of money. So overall, well done, Blackboard. Sorry, I'm not in the market. Okay, so Hawks. We'll check out a Hawks one by request. Let's go with this: stimulate class activities, class discussion with group activities. Use activities in Pathways to College Mathematics to promote discussion and application of essential mathematics in a group setting. So I'm going to give Hawks a rating of bad for this one because I have no idea what that means. And they mentioned their product at the beginning, and I still don't know what it is. I guess it's a book. I guess Pathways to College Mathematics is probably some kind of interactive book. So I give them a thumbs down for this because it's confusing. Assign chapter projects, application exercises, and collaborative learning activities as group work to give students practice applying key topics and concepts. This one I'm okay with, except for the part that they bolded what seems to be a random portion of the sentence. I have no idea why that part is bolded. I'm guessing they wanted to draw my eye to that first, so I would skip the stuff above it. But I don't see why that part's more important than the other parts. So this I kind of give a medium thumb to, whatever between thumbs up and thumbs down. Now this I like, that they give me an example. Collaborative learning. The class should be divided into teams of 2 or 3 students. Each team will need access to a digital camera, a printer, and a ruler. So apparently this textbook was designed for use in 2007 when people had printers and rulers. But otherwise, I like that they have this snippet. If this is them putting their best foot forward, I'm really not interested in their product. But I like that they provided this snippet. Let me know what you guys think. Does this sound like a good product? Does this sound like a good advert? Have they established empathy with you? Have they shown their value proposition well? Have they demonstrated to you why pick them over the alternative? And have they demonstrated to me their price? Request free access, free exam copy. Those are good. Obviously I can request a free copy. Nicely done, Hawks. I'm glad that they have that. I'm glad they have it highlighted so that I know that the price to me to try it out is free, because trials should always be free. It's a single semester course designed to prepare students for any curriculum. Why did you only tell me that halfway down the advert? Nobody read down to here. The guided notebook helps student develop a deeper understanding. If you can't even use proper grammar in your email, obviously I'm not going to buy your book. Boo, Hawks, I'm out. Help student develop a deeper understanding. Who's going to buy a book for someone who can't write a grammatically correct advert? Nobody, that's who. All right, let's move on to XYZ homework. This, by the way, a hint to you that you should write grammatically correctly in your ad. Dear Professor. Could they be less endearing than Dear Professor? They could have at least used my name to build some rapport, but all right, I'll give them Dear Professor. What if you made the switch to OER in 2020? This is a great way to start a sales pitch. What if you made the switch? So it's offering me a question, giving me something to think about, giving me their value proposition right out the door. What if I made the switch? All right, convince me. Show me the future where I made a switch. We offer great support for faculty and students at a price your students will appreciate. All right, I'll give you that. What's the price? What's the price? Low annual price? Low annual price? Most MATLAB software is too expensive. We have equivalent functionality for a fraction of the cost. What's the price? Junk. You have to tell me the price. If you're going to offer a low-cost alternative to my higher-cost options, you better lead with the price. Because if I don't know how much it's going to be, how do I know that you're cheaper? I have to waste the time going through the bid process to even see if you are beating the value of my current product. I mean, this might work if we had a full-time person whose job it was to evaluate these kinds of different programs. Maybe I'd look at these guys and say, okay, they claim to be lower. Let me give them a chance to bid. But otherwise, I mean, come on. It's not going to help. Sorry. It's just telling me it's low doesn't convince me. For a remarkably low annual price, they could have at least maybe listed some products, by the way, that they were cheaper than, or that they claimed to be cheaper than. That would have worked. Well, let's continue, okay? Because that sin is made by almost everyone trying to sell you things. Nobody wants to put their price anymore. That's just part of our societal expectation now. So I'm not going to knock them for that because everybody does it. All right, you have a choice. Great. Join hundreds of your mathematics colleagues who trust XYZ Homework, a powerful, proven online instruction and homework tool for their OER classrooms. I don't know what an OER classroom is. I'm not ashamed to admit it. And I'm pretty good with acronyms, so that was probably a bad move on their part. Although I imagine their target audience does know, so that's fine. Now, they said hundreds of mathematics colleagues, which sounds kind of unimpressive to me, considering there are thousands of mathematics institutions across the country. But okay, I'll give them. It's a good explanation of their value, except that it hasn't really told me why they're better. It's just told me that it's an online instruction and homework tool, of which there are obviously dozens and dozens and dozens. For a remarkably low annual price that includes multiple courses for your students, XYZ Homework, an OpenStax ally, offers professionally created course templates for all OpenStax math titles, including, and then a list of a few. I've never heard of OpenStax, so that means nothing to me. The fact that they put that front and center makes me feel like this is a product that's intended for people who know what OpenStax is. So I already feel like I've been excluded, and I should probably move on. So that's not really a good choice on their part. Although I understand that they probably wanted to include the name of this other service because they're partnered with them or because it's part of their reputation. Whatever. Course templates include video lessons, ebook links, class notes, and most importantly, pre-built assignments for every section of the book. This is true of every book I've ever read on math ever, so this is a terrible value proposition because it's what I expect from a book already in the first place. So they are not showing me how they are better than their alternatives. They are explaining to me that they are the same as all of my alternatives, and the only thing that they've offered me so far that's demonstrated that they're better is that they might be cheaper. And unlike the big guys, in quotes, the big guys, XYZ Homework is committed to one thing: student success in your classroom. Well, now I'm on board. I mean, all the other textbooks publishers told me they wanted students to fail in my classroom. These guys have clearly differentiated themselves from their competition. We demonstrate this commitment through our superior onboarding, training, and personalized professional support. The only thing in there that I think is objective and actionable for me is personalized professional support. That sounds like they're going to dedicate somebody, a customer service rep, to speak to me if I have any issues. That is the only thing there that sounds like a selling point. The other stuff, I don't know what superior onboarding is. I don't know what training is. So those don't really sell me. Does a reliable, affordable, easy-to-use homework management and instructional platform sound too good to be true? Yes, and it probably is. I haven't seen one yet. If anyone has a online homework management or instructional platform that they like, please post its name in chat. I'll see if they sent me an email. Try XYZ Homework next term and discover the answer for yourself. I like the way that this conclusion is phrased. I like that they've posed a question. They've sort of tried to make me think about it. They've demonstrated, or they've tried to demonstrate, that they are going to be a reliable, affordable, easy-to-use homework management and instructional platform. Overall, I think it's a great conclusion. I wouldn't probably put this in myself because it sounds a little bit too kind of chintzy and strange, but I don't mind it, and it's pretty typical of a sales sign-off. I didn't see anybody post the name of a homework platform that they actually enjoy. I wager that's probably because there aren't any. But if you post one in Discord, I'll look at it next time. All right, so please submit your RFP proposal in class. So it's supposed to be in class writing assignment soon, and I will upload the homework after that. It'll be due probably next Tuesday. Otherwise, I will see you guys in senior design, where we'll probably skip the lecture today again, because I got some things to talk about with some of you. All right. Have a good 15-minute break. See you soon.